Hey folks, before we get started, I just wanted to tell you, you can unlock unlimited access to political news, commentary, opinion, and a whole lot more at inforum.news/port for only 99 cents a month for your first 3 months. Hurry, get this limited time offer at inforum.news/port now. This podcast is brought to you by the North Dakota Petroleum Foundation. From heating our homes, empowering our vehicles, to cell phones, clothing, and medical equipment, oil and natural gas makes everyday life better. North Dakota Oil and Natural Gas, advancing the possibilities. Learn more at ndpetroleumfoundation.org. Welcome to Plain Talk. Happy to be with you. You know, earlier this week, during the Wednesday episode, we touched on this issue a little bit, Chad Oban and I. But there's a push to build a new pipeline in North Dakota. And pipelines aren't anything new to our state. We have tens of thousands of miles of pipelines in our state just serving the oil and gas industry. You know, we have water pipelines. This is not a new thing. But a carbon pipeline, I should say that, even carbon pipelines, not new. We have one that's been operated by the Dakota Gasification, well, a subsidiary, I should say, of the Dakota Gasification Company. It's been operating for over 20 years. Carbon storage, that's a new trick for our state. But right now we're talking about a pipeline. We're talking, well, I guess pipeline and storage. A company called Summit Carbon Solutions. The pipeline's called the Midwest Carbon Express. They want to bring carbon emitted by ethanol plants across our region, including here in North Dakota, bring it to North Dakota, bury it underground. Anytime you build a pipeline, it's tricky business because you're dealing with hundreds, sometimes thousands of landowners, depending on how long it is. If you're crossing state lines, you've got multiple levels of federal regulation. There's usually court challenges. There's litigation. There's a reason why doing this sort of thing costs billions of dollars and takes literally years. So here to talk with me, because I'm in favor of building the pipeline and storing carbon. I think it's exciting for our state. I think not only can it make our carbon heavy industries more viable into the future, but it creates a new industry in and of itself for our state that can hopefully pay out and compensate landowners, can create jobs and opportunity and all those other things we want for our state. But here to talk with me, part of the process is negotiating with landowners. So here with me on the show is Daryl Lies. He is the president of the North Dakota Farm Bureau, along with a gentleman by the name of Swenson, who farms a family farm near Beulah, North Dakota, and is part of a landowner group that is concerned about pore space leasing, and they're advocating against the use of eminent domain to build this pipeline. So let's, I tell you what, Daryl, let's start with you, because I wrote a column this week, and in my column, I'm looking at this, and I'm looking at your organization, and I haven't really seen the Farm Bureau dig in on a pipeline like this before. Again, pipelines get built every year in our state. I haven't seen your organization do it, and I'm trying to think, why is your organization elevating this particular project in such a way that, in a way that, at least from my perspective, you haven't before? And I couldn't help but see in that maybe an expression of your dissatisfaction with Governor Doug Burgum. His administration has been very supportive of the carbon capture and the carbon pipeline. And so that was my argument. I have a feeling that you're going to tell me right now that I'm all wet.
Well, you're all wet and maybe expelling too much CO2, Rob, since we're talking about carbon here. I think you're misinformed and maybe need to go back and follow what we have done in the past when it comes to these type of issues. We organized a group of landowners on a power line that went from Center to Grand Forks, and we helped that negotiation along and make sure that routing was more favorable for landowners instead of just cutting across their land, and things like that on that one. And we're also currently involved with landowners on the new one that's proposed in southwest North Dakota coming across the south. And then let's talk about a pipeline. When the DAPL was going in, we had landowners come to us, and we were involved in organizing a group of landowners to actually get involved with that and direct that a little bit and avoid some areas and make it better for landowners and increase compensation where it should be. So this is not new to us, Rob. Anyone that's been paying attention knows this is what we do. And, so it's not a new phenomenon.
If I can, my observation of your work, like on DAPL and that, it seemed a lot more collaborative than this is. This seems more acrimonious, more confrontational. And I want to get into the specifics of what this pipeline is. But your group, it seems more confrontational, more acrimonious than in the past. You say that's unfair.
Well, and so let's look at why maybe. Okay. And it's a direct reflection of landowners reaching out to us. This isn't me or our organization that is got the angst on this. This is the landowners that are here's some of the reasons why, Rob, because we have stories from landowners that how they found out about this is people trespassing on their land in quote unquote doing surveys when they had no permission to be there. Okay. We also had people find out about this when folks were walking through an unharvested soybean field last fall, not just one, multiples, like 5, 6, 7, 8 people. And they were out there walking through, and the guy approached them. He says, "What are you doing walking through my soybean field?" "Oh, we're doing we're scouting for artifacts and doing a study on that." Well, you don't have permission to be here. They didn't even know about this pipeline at that point. And so when things like that happen at the start of this, Rob, that's probably why we have landowners that are a little more at angst, a little more at odds with this. And then to top it off, the amount of compensation that they were offering initially was pretty laughable.
Yeah. Well, that's fair. I mean, I don't know anything about people. If that's true, that they were accessing land without permission and they were trespassing, that's not a good way to win over landowners that you need to build your pipeline. Kurt, let's talk about the landowner issues. First of all, do you support the pipeline as a concept? I mean, a carbon pipeline, you think that's something that, assuming that some accommodation can be reached with landowners that's agreeable to everybody, do you think that's something that should be built?
Yeah, I'd say, Rob, myself personally, our family, and our landowner group, none of us are opposing the project. And personally, I'm in favor of the overall project moving forward, and maybe for different reasons. But, my personal background, I built businesses in the ethanol fuels industry and in the co-processing or co-products processing industry. It's going to help those colleagues. We had corn planted on our land for the first time ever this past year. And I know corn farmers are going to benefit from the increased strength of the corn markets. And I do believe that projects like this are good, but they need to be done properly. And
okay, so what does properly look like to you?
Yeah, well, maybe we can take them in just a couple of segments, but the pipeline side, we personally aren't dealing with the pipeline side on our land, and our landowner group doesn't have anything to do with the pipeline side. But in visiting with those folks, and I went to the Farm Bureau meeting on Monday night in Bismarck this week and heard from lots of people there just as a listening ear. And, a lot of people have concerns over, first of all, the big picture use of eminent domain. And although our Public Service Commission has authority to grant common carrier pipelines the use of eminent domain, what a lot of people have the overarching concern of is, what is the eminent need here? What is the eminent need for this pipeline and the CO2 sequestration? And I don't know that that's been answered for them. So in the vacuum of information, people create their own beliefs and their own thoughts, and there's nobody filling that void of information for them of why is this an imminent need that you have to, and I'll use the word steal my land.
That's fair. I looked up in the state of North Dakota, eminent domain, and obviously there's a federal nexus here as well, because this crosses state lands. So you get agencies like FERC involved. But under North Dakota law, you cannot use eminent domain for economic development projects or if the justification is like increasing the tax base or tax revenues or employment, stuff like that. That means the government can't come and seize your land so that Amazon can build a warehouse or something. They're not allowed to do that. Where they can use it is obviously for public benefit. If we're going to build a road or something like that, that's the obvious public benefit. But then also, contingent to that is also something that's a common carrier. So that would be like telecommunications, electrical transmission lines, pipelines for energy. And I think one of the difficult things here, because you're saying, what's the eminent need? Well, one of the reasons why we're doing carbon sequestration is we have this whole hugely controversial, hugely disputed debate about climate change that's going on. So I suspect that people who are aligned and believe that climate change is this existential threat to humanity would say, that's your eminent need. We have to capture carbon to address that, although even the Sierra Club doesn't like carbon capture pipelines. So even that is messy. But I suppose that's the argument. That's the eminent. I think it's very easy to understand the eminent purpose of a gas pipeline, because gas is everybody's using gas. Everybody's using oil. Everybody's using electricity. The public nexus there is obvious. I suppose with a carbon pipeline, not so much. I mean, that's more of a question mark. Is that your argument?
Yeah, well, it certainly is a question mark. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. The thing that I've learned about eminent domain, and I'm not an attorney. I don't even play one on TV, but the things that I've learned about eminent domain is not only to the things about tax base and general economic health and things like that aren't allowed for the use of eminent domain. It has to have, in North Dakota, it has to have a direct impact on North Dakota citizens. So that's the other thing that, we're looking at it. And yes, there is, I think, maybe one ethanol plant, which is great that they have the ability that they're planning to hook up in the state. And this will help them in their business and their ownership and their corn growers that supply that plant. But how are the citizens of North Dakota benefiting from this in non-issues of tax base and economic health? We should
add that Summit just signed an agreement with Minn Kota over the Project Tundra thing, but that's about the carbon storage. Obviously, the pipeline's going to bring, but they've built a connection there now as well. We should mention, I suppose.
For sure. And I read that same press release that you probably read on that, and there's a lot of details that we probably don't know about that relationship and how that works. So I can't really comment on that. But Rob, what I would like to do on the eminent domain is also focus on the pore space. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with
I am
the 2009 North Dakota Century Code 3822. And how that authorized, for what was, it was good legislation and good foresight to put legislation in place so that we could capture carbon dioxide from what is our coal industry. It's an in-state industry. We all benefit from that industry being in-state, and an emerging and yet to be fully developed enhanced oil recovery market for carbon dioxide. And so those are things that are in-state. They benefit us strongly as a whole state. What we're struggling on this North Dakota Century Code 3822 is the fact that there's very specific wording in there that says that the North Dakota Industrial Commission can amalgamate our pore space. And so we as a landowner have pore space on our farm and ranch. And that pore space is ours. It ties to the surface owner of the land. And what the Industrial Commission has the authority by that legislation is to say, you know what, Mr. Private Company, you're coming in, you're going to store carbon dioxide in this landowner's pore space, but maybe they haven't consented to your lease agreement. Well, we as the Industrial Commission can tell you and tell that landowner that they have to allow that they have to allow a physical invasion, which is an eminent domain term, but a physical invasion of our private property for this pore space. And in addition to, Rob, it's not just the pore space, but the way the leases are worded and the way that the Industrial Commission has already granted 2 permits in the state. It grants every square inch of our surface lands. There isn't one single exclusion to the exclusive use of Summit carbon in this case. And so, I'm going to make maybe just a quick statement, because we'll probably talk about the lease terms a little bit. And under the advice of my attorney, he's told me to say that my comments on Summit's contract are my opinions, right? And those of my advisor. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. But essentially, we're sitting here as a landowner, and somebody can come in and there's no restrictions, and they can take any inch of my property on the surface, and they can put fences, pipelines, compressor stations, buildings, roads, anything they need on my property with zero restrictions on where it goes. Do you want a compressor station sitting out your bedroom window and listening to that 24/7 and having lights glaring in your window? I don't.
The need, and this gets into a complicated area, and I guess maybe for our listeners, and I'm maybe Daryl could shed some light on this too from the Farm Bureau point of view. But my understanding, the pore space issue specifically, you think of it like a company wants to come along and store something on your land. So think of it maybe like they want to build a warehouse on your land and store some stuff in it, right? And I think we can all agree if they want to do that, there should be some sort of a remuneration going to the landowner to store it, except that this is happening underground, in spaces that are underground, and they want to store stuff there. In this instance, carbon. That gets very, very complicated, Daryl. So from your organization's point of view, this pore space issue, what do we need to fix from your point of view?
Well, I think first of all, we need to fix the fact that they only need 60% of the land mass, not 60% of the landowners, 60% of the land mass within that amalgamated area to grant eminent domain on the other 40%. Just a quick reference on for the listeners, a quick look at that. Let's say that it's 10,000 acres. You got one guy that owns 6,000 acres, and you got 10 guys that own the other 4,000 acres. One guy can essentially force that project. So there's an issue there with that. Just that simple fact. We have our laws and our rights and all that are supposed to be written to take care of people, and here we're not taking care of the constituents of North Dakota with that kind of legislation. The other thing that has to be looked at is when you lease this pore space, I think there needs to be talk of what is an equitable amount of money for it, because it restricts other things happening within your property. Other future lease opportunities, other future mineral developments, then has to get permission from these companies to happen. And that's my understanding. That's my understanding of it. And once again, I'm not an attorney, but that's my understanding of it. So we gotta fix some of those things, I think, Rob.
Is part of the problem that the pore space, it's a new market. Maybe this is me speaking from a place of ignorance. It's a new market. And I think anytime you have a new market, like one of the big question marks is, what's the thing worth, right? What's the thing worth? What's somebody willing to pay for it? And what can be paid for it and still make, in this instance, the business of transporting and storing carbon still profitable, that a company can do it. I mean, is that part of the problem? Is that we just don't know what this stuff should cost yet?
Well, I think,
and I would say that is one of the problems, Rob, but I think we've got a pretty good idea based on what their cash flow is going to be just from the 45Q tax money and the supposed upsell that's going to happen in the ethanol product that they're going to get a kickback on. So I think we've got some of that established. And I think that there's not just compensation based on those numbers happening right now.
It's interesting. It's an emerging market, as you mentioned, Rob, and one that's, it's undefined and undeveloped, relatively undefined and relatively undeveloped. And just to share some numbers, some of the early pore space leases that we are aware of, signed, there's different compensation structures, but the primary one is a royalty, just like an oil and gas royalty pays. And in this case, it's paid on a metric ton. They were paid 17 cents a metric ton. And now landowners are currently being offered 25 cents a metric ton. And so you'd say, well, wow, that's a nice improvement. Well, we know of one leasing group in Texas right now that's leasing at 75 cents a ton. And we as landowners, we spent tens of thousands of dollars to put a lease together that we would be okay with signing. We spent hundreds of hours doing it. And what we proposed in it, Rob, was to do much more of a market-based compensation where we as landowners get paid similarly like an oil and gas lease. So when Summit's making money, we're making money. When they're not making money, we're not making money. And we want to be aligned with the benefits and the results of their project.
Treating carbon more like a commodity where the price goes up and down.
Correct. Or for a variety of reasons it can. And so in that model, what we propose in looking at Summit's financial projections that they've shared, when you look at a standard oil and gas lease today in the productive Bakken areas at 20% of the gross profits, if we were to get 20% of the gross profits of what Summit is projecting that they would make, essentially, in my opinion, we're being offered essentially 28 to 290 to 1 times less than what an oil and gas lease today structure would pay. And so you say, well, that's one data point, right? And nobody's written a lease like that. And so maybe we're asking for something that's not attractive to their investor group, wouldn't make, if they paid us that much money.
And oil and gas, that's extraction. That's a fundamentally, it's also a different thing. I guess I'm not a geologist enough to say maybe why it's different, but I think I can understand it's different. So you can't necessarily say this thing should be like this thing when they're kind of different things.
Couldn't agree more, but let's look at it this way. Summit's hijacked the North Dakota Century Code 3822 to extract federal tax dollars and government mandated low carbon fuel standards credits and have that windfall financial gain by extracting those through our pore space. I look at it that way, right? They're extracting oil and gas. In this case, Summit's extracting federal credits, tax credits, and low carbon fuel standard credits. So you might say, well, gosh, that's not a market model, right? It's not developed in the carbon sequestration space.
Well, at the end of the day, the product here is tax credits.
It is. But the thing is Texas, the school board, the school lands similar to our Department of Trust lands in North Dakota, but in Texas, I have in my hands right here a lease that they just signed in March with a carbon sequestration company that pays them on the gross revenue of their business. And it's a percentage of gross revenues. And so what we can't do is settle in an emerging market for the very first offer that comes across our desk because somebody says, hey, this is a great project and you can sign, and we've got this threat of eminent domain clouding the whole conversation. We should be able to take the time, take a step back, say, where is this market going, and not feel like we're being legislated out of getting the value of our land through North Dakota Century Code 3822 and this 60% eminent domain issue.
I was just reading Summit's. I was just reading they admitted their spokesperson over in Minnesota. I was just reading responded to some criticism that they hadn't been communicating well enough. And I think that's probably a valid criticism of them at this point, that the communications have not been great, up to and including if again, those incidents where people are traipsing across land without going and knocking on the door and asking permission. And listen, it's North Dakota. If you went up and knocked on somebody's door and asked, say, hey, we just want to, walk across your land and look at a few things, the answer is almost certainly going to be yes. So I don't understand how in the world that happened. That's my experience in North Dakota anyway. But they're saying that their goal is 100% voluntary agreements, and that they want to avoid eminent domain. That's what they're saying they're not taking eminent domain off the table. They're not saying we won't use it. So I think that's fair. But when they say that, do you think that's their goal?
I don't know what's in their hearts, Rob. Okay. I can't answer that.
Sure.
I do know that they have not been willing to make a commitment. And we went in front of the Oliver County Commission last fall when they were working to permit some wells. And we asked the commission at that time in a conditional use permit hearing process to say, hey, wait, these leases aren't really good leases. They're very one-sided. Can you put a constraint on the conditional use that says, look, we want them to get to 95% voluntary easements in this conditional use permitting process for these wells? And Summit wouldn't agree to that. And so I don't know what's in their hearts and what the right number is that they would agree to. That's for them and their story to tell. But I can tell you they wouldn't do that.
Daryl, from your point of view, what can Summit do to move this ball in the right direction? So that, because it sounds like everyone on this call ultimately is fine with building a pipeline, ultimately fine with doing carbon capture. What could Summit do to get more landowners on board and get this done from your point of view?
Well, they're going to have some relationship repair that's going to take quite a bit, I think, in my mind, Rob, just from, I mean, when you're trespassing on land, and those things are verified because there's a sheriff report on one of them.
Okay.
So,
yeah, I wasn't questioning you. I was just saying I haven't seen them. I wasn't necessarily questioning you. I don't have any reason to disbelieve.
Right. I just want to, so for the listeners, so that I'm not just pulling things out of the air here,
Sure.
And that's what is going on. So, I mean, relationship repair, and that's going to be tough. I mean, that is going to be tough. I'll be honest with you, because I don't think that they're going to be afraid to use eminent domain on as much as they have to. I think we can just look to Iowa for that fact. And, that's what we got to look at here too, Rob. That the majority of the ethanol plants that are going to benefit from this are in Iowa.
Yeah.
I think they just finally hit 20 to 25% easements, and they've been working there a lot longer than they've been working up here. They can't get those farmers down there to agree to easements when they're the biggest benefactors of it. We got to look at that. Something's not right.
What do you think the difference is? What do you think the difference is? Because like I said, I mean, building pipelines in North Dakota, not a new thing. I'm gonna say it's never an easy thing, right? It's hard to get a lot of people to agree to something. It's hard to come to agreements. It's hard to get through the regulatory hurdles. It's hard to get through the potential for litigation. But we do it all the time in North Dakota. If they're having that, if what you describe, if that's accurate, if they're having that much trouble in Iowa, what's the difference between this project and any other pipeline?
So, and I can speak a little bit to, let's talk about eastern North Dakota, because eastern North Dakota, a lot of folks that are getting this pipeline have never had a pipeline in their area.
I suppose that's true.
And we're dealing with a lot different value of land also, Rob. When you're dealing with land that's $10,000 to $15,000 an acre versus land that's $1,200 to $2,500 an acre, and you're actually being offered 10 times less than what these things are going for out in western North Dakota, there's an equity problem, and those landowners have a right to be upset with that inequity problem, in my mind. And then you add in things like tile and pump stations and drain fields and all that is going to be damaged in this. That's probably the difference here, Rob. And from the east, the eastern ones I can talk, those things with. And so I think there's some very, very big concern on that. The other thing is what is the science behind pushing this stuff at a high pressure through pipeline? Since it is so new, there's concern there also.
Yeah.
And
although again, we have had a CO2 line operating in North Dakota for 20 years.
Right. But we haven't had one that is coming with so many trunk lines as this one, so many different route options, coming into there, different size lines coming in, the main line that's rather large. And so, I mean, there's some differences there. And I'm not saying there's significant differences there, but there are some differences there. But I think it gets back to the fact that it's new for a lot of those folks, the way they've been initially treated, the way they've continually been treated. And on offer number 4, they're still not at levels of western North Dakota standards even. Is that really a company that's seriously trying to get to the point of doing this with 100% free will from the landowner?
Yeah. That's a fair question. Listen, my perspective is, we have just a few minutes left here. My perspective, Kurt, is I really want carbon capture to be carbon transport. I want it to be something that's successful. Even though this project, like Daryl noted, is bringing a lot of carbon from places other than North Dakota, although there's obviously some ties here, and they have the new connection in with Project Tundra, which I'm excited to see what else we can learn about that. I want this to be successful. I as a resident of North Dakota, we have a lot of carbon heavy industries. Not just energy, agriculture too. It's carbon heavy. And if that's going to be the new reality, that we have to do something about all that carbon, and it is, then this is something I want to work, because this would be very, very good for North Dakota, which really, I think, puts a lot of pressure on Summit to do it the right way. And I wrote a column about that. I've been a little bit of a cheerleader for this, I know. But I did write a column that they need to make sure they have the landowners on board, because if you start a landowner uprising in North Dakota, you're not going to get this through. Or even if you do get it through, you're going to have created so much resentment for your industry, for your company, that it's going to inhibit your ability to be as successful in the future. So to me, a lot of pressures on Summit to do this right.
Yeah, Rob, I think we're very aligned. We want to see carbon capture move forward as well. Our landowner group does. We as a family want to see it move forward, and that's all good. And as from an industry perspective, there's such great things that can come from it. From our perspective as the landowners that are focused in the sequestration zone, and again, a lot of landowners have signed up. And so, not begrudging that they've signed up, but there's a lot of us that, haven't and are working together. It's important to make sure that our first concern is about protection of our landowner rights, our land uses, how we get to continue to enjoy the use of our land that we do today. And there's zero restrictions on any of this in the lease and in the North Dakota Century Code and in the CO2 administrative rules, other than for the injection well itself. And that injection well is less than 1% of the infield developments that'll take place with all the roads and pipelines and compressor stations or whatever else goes into a project like this. And there's no restrictions on that. So we first have to get landowner preference on how do we have control over how that gets put on our land, where it gets put on our land, and then incorporate that into the contract. Because there are no regulations or rules like in the oil industry that we can fall back on for some of those protections. And so in an emerging industry like that, it's left up to us as landowners to negotiate private treaties with Summit in this case to get those protections put in. And that's the first thing. We talked a lot about compensation already. That is secondary. It's important, and we as landowners will never be and should never be ashamed to try to get the best value we can from our land. Yeah. But our first priority is all the protections and getting them written into the contract, because we can get all the promises and all the lip service out of whoever the company is that's coming to do it. The fact is we're not negotiating with those individuals. We're negotiating with a company. That company, they may not be the same people in 5 or 10 years there. The company may be sold. And so whatever was verbally said may not get lived up to. So there's a legal doctrine and concept called parole evidence, or the Four Corners doctrine, that essentially says the courts look to what's written on the paper. And we're asking for all the things that we're hearing to be written on the paper. Yeah. It's not a big hurdle for us.
And this is a little bit precedent setting. This is especially the storage part of it. Burying pipe in the ground, we've been doing lots of that. We already have a carbon pipeline, but the storage part of it is very, very new. We're setting a lot of precedents here. And it has to be agreeable to everybody. I mean, that is a fundamental basis of trade. And I don't ever begrudge landowners trying to get yours. I always laugh. I'm a big baseball fan, and so one of the and I'm a Yankees fan too. So that gives you some context. So that you always hear about these greedy players holding out for all this money. Get what you can, man. Get what you're worth, what somebody's willing to pay. Your land is worth what somebody's willing to pay. Go out and get yours. That's the capitalist system. I don't have a problem with that at all. Kurt, thanks for your time. Yeah. Daryl, thanks for your time as well.
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate the opportunity. Rob.
Want more political news like this? Visit inforum.news/port to get 3 months of unlimited access to our news network for only 99 cents a month. Don't wait. Get this limited time offer at inforum.news/port now.